Imagine boarding a luxury flight, expecting the comfort and respect your status commands, only to be told, quietly but firmly, that your seat no longer belongs to you. This was the reality for Malcolm Grant, a calm and powerful black CEO who, without raising his voice, faced blatant discrimination at 35,000 feet. The first-class cabin of Altius Airlines, normally a sanctuary of privilege, became a stage where entitlement clashed with dignity. What happens when quiet strength meets brazen arrogance? How does one reclaim respect in a world designed to deny it? This story is not just about a seat on a plane. It's about the invisible battles fought daily by those who demand justice without spectacle. What unseen forces can dismantle entrenched prejudice, and who really holds the power when silence becomes the loudest statement. Join us as we unravel this powerful narrative of courage, strategy, and the relentless pursuit of fairness. If you believe in justice, dignity, and the power of quiet strength, hit that like button, share this story, and subscribe to Silent Defenders. Let's begin. The cabin of Altius Flight 327 to Amsterdam was the kind of place where silence was not just expected, it was demanded. The soft hum of the engines, the muted rustle of newspapers, and the occasional clink of fine china created an atmosphere that felt suspended in time. It was a world apart from the chaotic terminal waiting outside. Malcolm Grant settled into Seat 1A, the premier suite in the first-class cabin, a seat he had flown in countless times before on this particular route. The leather cradled him with a familiar softness as he adjusted the tablet on his lap. His tailored navy suit was impeccable, a quiet reflection of the precision he demanded in his role as CEO of Solstice Technologies. He was a man who preferred action over words and calm over confrontation. His dark eyes, framed by thin black-rimmed glasses, scanned a financial report glowing softly on the screen. Every number, every graph was a detail in a vast digital symphony he had helped compose. Outside the window, the tarmac slowly gave way to the taxiway lights, the outside world receding as the plane prepared to carry them across the Atlantic. Malcolm's presence was understated but commanding. He didn't need to raise his voice or draw attention to himself. Those who knew him understood the weight he carried simply by being still and present. He had learned long ago that power was not always loud. Sometimes it was the quietest breath in the room that held the greatest force. Around him, the first-class cabin was a symphony of luxury and order. Plush, cream-colored leather seats with privacy dividers, softly glowing reading lamps, and freshly pressed linens marked the space. The scent of freshly brewed espresso mingled with subtle notes of sandalwood, creating a calming ambiance. Flight attendants moved like choreographed dancers, anticipating every need before it was even voiced. Malcolm glanced up momentarily, noticing the gentle, practiced smiles of the crew as they made their rounds. Nadine Harper, the lead flight attendant, offered him a polite nod as she passed by. There was a flicker of something behind her eyes, a hesitation he didn't catch at first, but would become significant later. As he returned his attention to the tablet, a sudden voice cut through the quiet. "That's not your seat, sir," a man's voice said, firm and condescending. Malcolm looked up, setting the tablet aside with deliberate calm. The man stood in the aisle just a few feet away, his posture arrogant, his gaze unapologetically challenging. Harrison Beckett was his name, a figure known to frequent this cabin with a sense of entitlement that went beyond mere status. Broad-shouldered and impeccably dressed in a dark, tailored suit, His appearance screamed old money, a relic of an era that still believed power was inherited rather than earned. "I think you're mistaken," Harrison continued, his tone dripping with self-assurance. "That's my seat." Malcolm stood slowly, meeting Harrison's eyes without a flicker of uncertainty or anger. He reached into the inner pocket of his jacket and pulled out his boarding pass, presenting it with quiet dignity. "Seat 1A, Malcolm Grant," he said softly. The cabin fell into an uneasy hush as Nadine stepped forward, her face betraying a split second of conflict. She glanced from Malcolm's boarding pass to Harrison's impatient expression. For a moment, the rules of order and privilege collided in her eyes. Without a word, Nadine reached out, snatching the boarding pass from Malcolm's hand. Her fingers trembled slightly, an uncharacteristic slip in her usual grace, and then, in a move that stunned everyone, she crushed the boarding pass into a tight, mangled ball. The sound of paper crumpling echoed harshly in the otherwise quiet cabin. Malcolm's eyes remained steady. He said nothing. His calm was a silent rebuke, a challenge that went far beyond a mere seat on a plane. "We'll move you to 4C, Nadine said, forcing a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Please, don't make a scene." The insult hung heavy in the air, but Malcolm simply nodded. He gathered his tablet and moved away without haste, his footsteps measured and sure. There was no room for outbursts, no appetite for spectacle. This was not his fight to lose in noise and anger. As Malcolm settled into seat 4C, a space still luxurious but noticeably less so than the forward-facing first suite, his mind began to churn beneath the surface. He was not reacting out of wounded pride. This was a calculated moment, a part of a larger game played in silence. Behind him, passengers exchanged glances. Some averted their eyes, uncomfortable with the unfolding injustice. Others whispered quietly, their voices hushed but tinged with disbelief. From her seat in 2D, Isabella Crane watched the entire scene unfold. Her silver hair was pulled back into a tight bun, her sharp eyes assessing every detail with an analytical precision. The director of the investment fund that had recently acquired a controlling stake in Altius Airlines, Isabella was no stranger to power plays, and she knew Malcolm Grant far better than anyone aboard. Their history was complicated, layered with respect and rivalry, alliances and quiet disagreements. But in that moment, a flicker of recognition passed between them. No words were exchanged, none were needed. Malcolm leaned back against his seat, exhaling slowly. He opened his phone and unlocked a secure messaging app. His thumb hovered over a single contact, IC, Isabella Crane. He typed one word, "Now," and pressed send. The quiet authority with which Malcolm Grant moved through the cabin, from the highest seat to one further back, was a study in dignity and control. He was a man fully aware of the power he wielded, not the loud, brash power of entitlement, but the deep, strategic power of influence. As the plane's engines hummed steadily, a new chapter was quietly beginning, one where the rules of the old guard would be challenged not by shouting, but by the steady hand of a man who understood the game better than anyone. The tension in the first-class cabin was subtle but undeniable. A ripple of discomfort spread like a quiet wave among the passengers. Some shifted in their seats, glancing sideways at the unfolding drama. Others pretended to focus on the glowing screens embedded in their seat backs or flipped through magazines with distracted hands. But no one looked away from Harrison Beckett, the man who had just usurped Malcolm Grant's seat. Harrison stood tall in the aisle, his broad frame filling the narrow passage. His expensive navy suit was cut perfectly, as if tailored by the very best designers money could buy. His hair was meticulously styled, and a gold watch peeked from under his cuff. He wore the kind of confidence that was born not only of wealth, but of years spent expecting the world to bend to his will. To him, the airline's first-class cabin was his personal domain, a kingdom he had helped build through decades of influence and investment. "I have every right to this seat," Harrison declared loudly, his voice carrying just enough to be heard by the nearest passengers. "I've been flying in 1A for years. It's my usual." Nadine Harper, the lead flight attendant, appeared at his side. Her practiced smile stretched thin beneath the weight of the situation. She was a woman in her mid-40s with soft features and an air of professionalism that often masked her true feelings. Nadine had spent years navigating the delicate balance between service and diplomacy. She knew when to assert authority and when to yield to those with power. She glanced at Harrison, then at Malcolm, who sat quietly in seat 4C, his calm demeanor unshaken by the confrontation. Nadine's eyes flickered with conflict. She knew the rules. She knew the boarding passes had been checked. But she also knew Harrison's reputation, a man who could make her life difficult in 1,000 ways if she crossed him. "Mr. Beckett," Nadine began carefully, "I understand your concerns, but Mr. Grant has the boarding pass for seat 1A. Harrison's lips curled into a smirk. "I don't care about boarding passes. I'm a founding investor in this airline. Without me, this company wouldn't be what it is today, and I expect to be treated as such." Malcolm looked up from his tablet, his voice calm but firm, respectfully. "Mr. Beckett, investment does not grant you the right to displace another passenger who holds a valid ticket." The cabin felt heavy with the weight of this exchange. Other passengers listened closely, sensing the unspoken tensions beneath the polite veneer. Nadine reached for Malcolm's boarding pass again, but this time her hands trembled visibly. In one quick motion, she tore the boarding pass roughly in half. The sound was jarring, breaking the fragile calm like a thunderclap. Heads turned sharply, expressions shifting from surprise to dismay. Malcolm remained still, absorbing the insult with quiet dignity. The crumpled remnants of his ticket fell to the plush carpet. "Please move to seat 4C, Nadine said, forcing her voice to stay polite but with a strained edge. "We want to avoid any disruption." Malcolm rose slowly, his gaze steady but distant. His mind was already calculating the next moves, the connections, the contacts, the system behind the scenes that would right this wrong. He was no stranger to battles fought in silence, in the shadows, away from public spectacle. As he gathered his belongings, his thoughts drifted briefly to moments long past boardrooms where similar slights had been dealt with a cold smile and a strategic nod. He understood the ritual well, the subtle, persistent erasure of his presence by those who could not accept his success. Malcolm took a breath as he moved toward seat 4C. The space was still luxurious but lacked the forward-facing grandeur of 1A. He placed his tablet on the side table with deliberate care, a quiet statement of resilience. From across the cabin, Isabella Crane observed the scene unfold with a sharp, calculating gaze. Her silver hair was pulled back tightly, and her eyes held a glint of determination. The director of the investment fund that controlled the airline, Isabella was no stranger to power plays herself. She recognized Malcolm's quiet strength immediately, Their past was complex former allies who had once dreamed of reshaping industries and dismantling old hierarchies together. Now, watching Malcolm being publicly humiliated triggered a silent resolve within her. It was time to act, without hesitation. Isabella pulled out her phone and initiated a call to a trusted contact in ground operations. Her voice was calm, firm, and resolute as she issued a directive that would soon ripple through every level of the airline's operation. Full crew recall, immediate replacement, Protocol Delta, back in the cabin. Harrison Beckett settled smugly into seat 1A. His eyes scanned the room, daring anyone to challenge his audacity. He pulled an oversized cigar from his jacket pocket, holding it like a trophy without lighting it. The cabin filled with the soft fizz of champagne being poured by another flight attendant, an almost theatrical display of deference to Harrison's perceived status. Passengers exchanged furtive glances. Some nodded subtly in Malcolm's direction. Others looked away, unwilling or afraid to confront the moment. The weight of the unspoken racism hung thick in the air. Malcolm, seated quietly in 4C, remained composed. His mind was far from this moment. He was already several steps ahead, weaving a web of influence that would transform this insult into a catalyst for change. The quiet war for dignity and justice had begun. Malcolm Grant sat quietly in seat 4C, the luxurious leather wrapped around him as comfortably as ever, but the seat felt smaller, the view less commanding. He placed his tablet carefully on the side table, his fingers brushing the smooth surface with deliberate calm. Around him, the soft murmur of the cabin filled the space, but Malcolm's mind was far from the hum of engines or polite chatter. His breath was steady, controlled, but beneath the surface a storm of thoughts brewed. He was no stranger to moments like this, moments where the weight of unseen forces pressed heavy on his shoulders. Yet this was different. This wasn't just about a seat on a plane. It was a reflection of a system designed to remind him that his place was always negotiable, always precarious. He remembered the crushed boarding pass still hidden somewhere in the folds of Nadine Harper's uniform jacket. That deliberate act tearing apart not just paper, but dignity. It echoed louder than any shout could have. Malcolm's eyes flickered briefly to the aisle. Harrison Beckett had settled into seat 1A with a smug grin, his presence loud without needing words. The oversized cigar he held was more prop than pleasure, a symbol of entitlement wielded like a weapon. But Malcolm didn't let the anger rise. He had learned early on that power wielded in haste could become a liability. This was a game played in silence, with patience and precision. His mind drifted to a memory from years ago, a boardroom in downtown Chicago, where he had once sat quietly, a younger man in a sea of well-dressed executives. The room had been filled with smiles and handshakes, but beneath the surface lay a current of exclusion. A white executive had dismissed one of Malcolm's proposals with a thinly veiled remark about fit and culture. Malcolm had smiled and nodded, swallowing the sting. That moment had shaped him. He understood the necessity of measured responses, of choosing battles wisely. Here, on this plane. The pattern repeated. The cabin crew moved efficiently around the cabin. Nadine Harper avoided Malcolm's gaze. Her posture was stiff, and her forced smiles lacked warmth. Malcolm knew the pressures she faced, the invisible threats and promises whispered in back rooms and corridors. He felt a flicker of compassion for her, despite the humiliation he had just endured. With a quiet resolve, Malcolm unlocked his phone and opened a secure messaging app. He paused a moment, fingers hovering over the keyboard, then typed a single word, "Now." He sent the message without hesitation, across the cabin, in seat 2D. Isabella Crane's eyes narrowed as her phone vibrated silently. She glanced discreetly at the screen, the single word from Malcolm shining boldly. A faint smile touched her lips, not of amusement, but of grim satisfaction. She was ready. Isabella had spent months working behind the scenes to prepare for moments like this. As the director of the controlling fund for Altius Airlines, she had insisted on reforms that would empower swift action against abuses of power and breaches of the company's code of conduct. The now was a trigger, a call to action embedded in contingency plans that few knew existed. Her fingers danced across the screen, making a call. The voice on the other end was gruff but accustomed to urgency. Full crew recall, immediate replacement, Protocol Delta. She ended the call, settling back with the ease of a commander confident in her orders. Meanwhile, Malcolm leaned back into his seat, closing his eyes briefly. The calm exterior masked a mind working at full capacity. He replayed every moment of the confrontation, analyzing the players, the signals, the vulnerabilities. This wasn't just about reclaiming a seat, it was about reclaiming respect, about dismantling a system that permitted such indignities to persist in plain sight. The passengers around him were beginning to notice the shift in the cabin's atmosphere. Whispers exchanged in muted tones, uncertain glances between strangers. The sense of normalcy was fracturing. Harrison Beckett, oblivious to the storm about to descend, continued to revel in his perceived triumph. He toasted himself with champagne, the glass catching the soft lighting in a way that made it sparkle like a trophy. Nadine returned with another bottle, pouring generously, her smile tightly controlled. She played the part expected of her, but the weight of the moment was etched in the slight tremor of her hands. A few rows behind, a young business traveler glanced up from his phone. His brow furrowed as he read a news alert about corporate scandals and rising calls for accountability in the airline industry. He looked around, sensing the undercurrent of tension and the brewing drama. The cabin was a microcosm of a larger world privilege, power, injustice, and the slow turning gears of change. Malcolm's phone buzzed again. A new message from Isabella standby team en route. 3 minutes, his lips pressed into a thin line. The time for silent observation was ending. He glanced out the window at the fading light of the setting sun. The sky was a canvas of oranges and purples, serene and beautiful. It contrasted sharply with the turmoil inside the cabin. This was his domain now, his battle. But it would be fought quietly, strategically, with precision. He opened his eyes and looked around. The first-class passengers had settled into an uneasy silence, the kind that fills a room moments before something monumental happens. Malcolm sat upright, fingers folded calmly in his lap. The flight was about to change forever. Isabella Crane sat in seat 2D, her posture immaculate, the lines of her charcoal silk dress crisp and flawless. The gentle hum of the cabin surrounded her like a soft veil, but her mind was sharp and alert, tracking every movement, every whispered conversation. She had watched the entire exchange between Malcolm Grant and Harrison Beckett unfold with clinical precision. The tearing of Malcolm's boarding pass had been an unspoken insult, a public display of disregard, and Isabella had seen the weight it carried. It was a breach of dignity she could not tolerate. Her silver hair was pulled back tightly into a no-nonsense bun, framing a face that rarely betrayed emotion. Yet beneath her composed exterior, a storm of resolve had taken hold. Years of navigating power and influence had brought her to this moment, a moment where silent action was demanded. She reached into her purse and pulled out her phone, unlocking it with the smooth efficiency of someone accustomed to command. Her thumb hovered briefly over a contact labeled Ground Ops Lead. Then she typed a single phrase, Protocol Delta. Her voice in the ensuing call was calm but resolute. Immediate crew recall on Flight 327. Full replacement effective now. No exceptions. As she ended the call, Isabella's thoughts flickered briefly to Malcolm, a man she once trusted implicitly, a partner whose vision had once aligned with hers in the pursuit of a fairer, more equitable world. Their paths had diverged over time, disagreements on strategy and philosophy creating a rift between them. But in moments like this, when the system itself was under assault, old differences faded. She was reminded of the power they wielded together, a power that could reshape institutions, break old patterns, and enforce accountability without fanfare. Her gaze drifted to the aisle where Harrison Beckett continued to bask in his assumed victory. He laughed loudly, recounting tales of his past investments to the nearest passengers, oblivious to the shifting currents around him. Nadine Harper moved quietly nearby, her forced smiles now tinged with anxiety. Isabella caught the faint tremble in her hands as she poured champagne for Harrison once more. Nadine was trapped in a role she neither desired nor deserved, a pawn in a larger game of power. Isabella's fingers tapped thoughtfully against her phone as she considered the upcoming moments. The standby crew she had called in was trained for exactly this kind of situation, swift, efficient, and decisive. There would be no public spectacle, no drawn-out confrontation, just a clean, professional transition. She remembered the countless hours spent behind closed doors crafting policies that could prevent exactly this kind of indignity. Policies that empowered those with authority to act immediately, without bureaucracy or delay. Policies that made the airline a model for fairness and respect. Her mind drifted briefly to the first time she and Malcolm had crossed paths. It had been at a conference years earlier, two young visionaries with ambitious ideas about technology, equity, and corporate responsibility. Their partnership had blossomed into a formidable alliance, but it had also been tested by competing visions of how best to wield influence. Isabella believed in transparency, in bringing injustices to light and demanding change openly. Malcolm preferred quiet power, the unseen hand that shifted systems from within. Both approaches were valid, and together they had achieved remarkable progress, now sitting quietly in 2D. Isabella was the executioner of that progress, poised to unleash a mechanism Malcolm had helped design long ago. Across the cabin, passengers began to notice a subtle shift. The flight attendant's smiles faltered. The pilots emerged from the cockpit, exchanging urgent, hushed words with ground staff visible through the open jet bridge. An unexpected announcement crackled through the cabin's PA system. Attention, all passengers. Due to operational protocols, the current flight crew will be recalled and replaced. We apologize for any inconvenience and appreciate your understanding. A ripple of confusion swept through the cabin. Nadine's face paled as she exchanged worried glances with her colleagues. Harrison's smug expression faltered, replaced by genuine surprise. Isabella watched silently. Her eyes locked on Malcolm. who had remained calm throughout, eyes steady but alert. She knew this was just the beginning. The quiet revolution she had set in motion would send shock waves far beyond the confines of this plane. The new crew would arrive shortly. They were the embodiment of the values Isabella and Malcolm had fought to instill: competence, integrity, and respect without prejudice. As the cabin buzzed with a mixture of disbelief and curiosity, Isabella allowed herself a small, satisfied smile. Justice was not always loud. Sometimes it was the quiet, inevitable shift that changed everything. She glanced once more at Malcolm. Their eyes met briefly, a silent acknowledgment of shared purpose and unspoken promises. The flight was no longer just a journey to Amsterdam. It was a stage for change, a testament to the power of strategy, patience, and unwavering principle. Isabella folded her hands calmly in her lap, ready for the moment when the system would right itself. The cabin of Altius Flight 327 felt different now, as if the very air had shifted, charged with an unspoken tension that no one dared acknowledge openly. The soft murmur of polite conversation was replaced by a low hum of uncertainty. Passengers exchanged furtive glances, sensing that something unusual was unfolding, something that transcended the usual pre-flight rituals. Nadine Harper moved through the cabin with practiced grace, her smile more strained than ever. She paused beside Harrison Beckett, who was lounging in seat 1A, sipping champagne and recounting stories of his pivotal role in building Altius Airlines. "I was there when this was just a regional carrier," he boasted loudly, voice carrying through the cabin. "My money, my connections, my vision made this what it is today." His tone was thick with self-importance, and a few passengers shifted uncomfortably. Some nodded politely, others looked away, unwilling to engage with his display of entitlement. Nadine poured him another glass without hesitation. A silent endorsement of his claims, but the tremor in her hand betrayed the unease she felt inside. Malcolm Grant remained seated in 4C, his posture calm, his eyes reflecting a deep contemplation. He listened quietly, the noise around him fading into the background as his thoughts raced ahead. He understood this was more than a battle for a seat. It was a battle for respect, for recognition, and ultimately for systemic change. The captain's voice came over the PA, steady and professional but carrying a hint of concern. "Ladies and gentlemen, we regret to inform you there will be a brief delay due to a required operational check. We appreciate your patience." Passengers sighed, some visibly frustrated by the news, but beneath the surface, a sense of anticipation simmered. The delay was more than technical. It was a signal. In the cabin, crew members exchanged nervous looks. Nadine's forced composure was cracking. A few moments later, the flight attendants began gathering their belongings, their movements hesitant, uncertain. Malcolm watched carefully, noting every subtle shift. The pilots emerged from the cockpit, their faces serious as they spoke quietly with ground staff visible through the open jet bridge. Suddenly, the jet bridge extended again, connecting firmly to the aircraft door. The hydraulics hissed loudly, drawing the attention of every passenger. Through the door stepped a new team, the standby crew called in by Isabella Crane. They were a study in professionalism, 3 flight attendants, impeccably dressed, moving with coordinated precision, 2 pilots in crisp uniforms, their expressions calm and authoritative. The contrast with the outgoing crew was stark. Nadine and her colleagues stood frozen, faces pale, realizing the true nature of the recall. The lead attendant of the new crew made direct eye contact with Nadine, offering a polite but unmistakably final nod. "Thank you for your service," she said clearly, leaving no room for misinterpretation. One by one, the original crew filed off the plane, their humiliation complete and public. Passengers watched in stunned silence, absorbing the unprecedented scene unfolding before them. Harrison Beckett looked on, disbelief etched across his face. "What is this?" he demanded loudly. "You can't just replace the entire crew mid-flight." Jude Halston, the airline supervisor who had arrived quietly during the transition, stepped forward. His voice was calm, measured, but carried the undeniable weight of authority. "Mr. Beckett, this action is effective immediately and non-negotiable. The current crew has failed to uphold the standards expected by Altius Airlines." Harrison scoffed, his confidence faltering. "I am a founding investor," he insisted. "You owe me respect. You owe me this flight." Jude's gaze did not waver. "Your priority status has been revoked. You are no longer authorized to travel on this flight or any Altius partner flights." The words hit like a thunderclap. Harrison's face drained of color as he absorbed the magnitude of the declaration. Around the cabin, passengers exchanged looks of shock and satisfaction in equal measure. Malcolm Grant sat still, his expression unreadable but his eyes reflecting a quiet triumph. This was the moment the system spoke back. No shouting, no spectacle, just decisive action. The new crew moved through the cabin, their presence reassuring and professional. The lead attendant approached Malcolm, her voice soft but clear. "Mr. Grant, Suite 1A is now fully prepared for you. We apologize for the earlier inconvenience and are committed to making your journey as comfortable as possible." Malcolm nodded, standing with the same measured grace he had shown all along. As he walked back to his rightful seat, the cabin seemed to breathe a collective sigh of relief. The battle for dignity had been won not through noise, but through quiet power and unyielding principle. The cabin atmosphere had shifted palpably. Where moments ago there had been tense whispers and uncertain glances, now there was a quiet reverence, a sense of witnessing something rare and significant. The new flight crew moved with a seamless professionalism that seemed to command respect without demanding it. Malcolm Grant sat in seat 4C, observing quietly as the lead flight attendant, a tall woman with sharp hazel eyes and dark hair pulled back into a precise bun, made her way down the aisle. She carried herself with the calm authority of someone accustomed to command, but tempered with genuine kindness. She paused at Malcolm's seat, offering a small, sincere smile. "Mr. Grant," she said clearly, "your suite is ready. Please allow us to make your journey as comfortable as possible." Malcolm nodded, a slight smile touching his lips. He rose slowly, his movements deliberate, embodying the calm strength that had become his trademark. As he made his way back to seat 1A, the plush leather welcomed him like an old friend. The familiar space a quiet affirmation of order restored. Around him, passengers watched with a mixture of awe and curiosity. The cabin screens flickered briefly, then changed to display a message in stark black and white updated flight command structure, effective immediately. The words were a clear signal. This was more than a crew change. It was a shift in power, a reassertion of authority that would ripple through every corner of Altius Airlines. Harrison Beckett sat frozen in the aisle, his broad frame slumped and defeated. The revocation of his status had stripped him of the privileges he once took for granted. The oversized cigar lay untouched on the tray table, a symbol of his crumbling dominance. Two security officers appeared quietly at the jet bridge entrance and moved toward Harrison with measured steps. Their presence was a stark reminder that the consequences of entitlement were real and uncompromising. Malcolm watched the scene unfold with quiet detachment. He had no desire to gloat. His victory was not born of personal triumph but of a deeper justice. As Harrison was escorted off the plane, a hush fell over the cabin. Passengers exchanged looks of satisfaction and relief. Some whispered words of support for Malcolm, recognizing the dignity with which he had borne the ordeal. The new flight crew resumed their duties with grace and precision, their calm presence reinforcing the message that the airline was changing. Isabella Crane remained seated in 2D, her eyes scanning the cabin with satisfaction. Her phone buzzed softly, and she checked the message confirming the crew replacement had been executed flawlessly. She allowed herself a brief moment of reflection. The partnership she once shared with Malcolm had been complicated. But moments like this reaffirmed their shared vision of accountability and fairness. Malcolm settled back into seat 1A, opening his tablet to review documents, his mind already turning to the work ahead. The flight was long, but for the first time, he felt a quiet optimism. The systems had spoken. The message was clear. Privilege and entitlement were no longer immune to accountability. Around the cabin, a young passenger caught Malcolm's eye and offered a subtle nod. It was a small gesture, but one heavy with meaning, a passing of strength and hope. As the plane began its slow taxi toward the runway, the hum of the engine seemed steadier, more confident. The journey had become more than a flight. It was a testament to the power of quiet dignity and systemic change. Harrison Beckett stood alone in the aisle, his once imposing figure diminished by the weight of humiliation. The plush, first-class cabin, moments ago a throne room of entitlement, now felt like a cage. His breath came unevenly as the reality of what had just happened settled like a cold fog. "You can't do this," he barked, voice cracking under the pressure. "I'm a founding investor. I've paid for every privilege on this airline." Jude Halston, the airline supervisor who had delivered the final verdict moments earlier, stepped forward. His calm presence was a stark contrast to Harrison's unraveling. "Mr. Beckett, your priority status has been permanently revoked. You are no longer authorized to travel on any Altius flights or partner airlines." The words landed with crushing finality. Harrison's face paled. The flush of arrogance drained away to reveal panic and desperation. He glanced around the cabin, searching for support, but found only quiet faces and a few nods toward Malcolm Grant, the man whose quiet strength had brought this moment about. "Think carefully," Jude said quietly but firmly. "You can comply peacefully or be escorted by security." The two security officers, Derek and Fiona, advanced toward Harrison with professional composure. Their presence was a silent warning. The choice was his. Harrison's shoulders slumped, and for the first time, the veneer of power shattered completely. His voice dropped to a defeated whisper. "This isn't over." But the cabin was no longer a stage for his theatrics. Passengers watched with a mix of relief and respect as the man who had embodied arrogance was led away. Malcolm Grant remained seated in 1A, his expression composed yet thoughtful. He had witnessed the collapse of entitlement without a single raised voice or angry outburst. The power of quiet dignity had spoken louder than any confrontation. Isabella Crane observed from her seat in 2D, a faint smile playing at the corners of her mouth. The system they had crafted was working as intended, swift, efficient, and just. As Harrison was escorted off the plane, the murmurs among passengers grew louder, a mix of awe and approval. A sense of justice had been restored, but the deeper work had only just begun. Malcolm's thoughts turned inward. He reflected on the years it had taken to build influence discreetly, to weave threads of change into the fabric of entrenched systems. He thought of the countless moments when dignity had been demanded silently, in boardrooms and conference halls, often unseen by the public eye. This moment was different. It was public, undeniable, and a beacon of hope for many who had faced similar indignities. He reached for his phone, opening a secure message to Isabella. A single word, done. Her reply came swiftly. Understood. Together, they had initiated a shift that would reverberate beyond this flight, challenging norms and inspiring change. The new flight crew moved efficiently, attending to passengers with renewed energy and grace. The atmosphere lightened as the flight prepared for departure. Malcolm leaned back, eyes closed briefly as he allowed himself a moment of quiet satisfaction. His journey was far from over, but today a significant battle had been won. Around him, the first-class cabin settled into a calm, respectful quiet. The story unfolding in these seats was not just about privilege lost or gained, it was about the restoration of respect, the affirmation of dignity. Outside the window, the runway lights beckoned, the engines roared softly, a steady pulse ready to carry them forward. As the plane taxied toward takeoff, Malcolm opened his eyes, ready for whatever came next. The cabin had returned to a tense stillness after Harrison Beckett was escorted off the plane. Passengers settled uneasily into their seats, exchanging quiet whispers that rippled through the rows like a soft breeze. The power dynamics had shifted, but the echoes of what had just transpired lingered palpably in the air. Malcolm Grant sat quietly in his rightful seat, the leather familiar and comforting beneath his fingertips. His eyes scanned the faces around him, some filled with awe, others with silent respect, and a few still wrestling with disbelief. Yet, none could deny the undeniable presence of quiet strength that Malcolm exuded. Across the aisle, a young woman seated in 3B glanced toward Malcolm and offered a subtle nod. It was a small gesture, but heavy with significance, an acknowledgement of the resilience and grace he had displayed. Malcolm returned the nod with a faint, understanding smile. Meanwhile, the new lead flight attendant, whose name tag read Elena, moved with a serene confidence through the cabin. Her hazel eyes held a subtle knowingness, as if she understood the gravity of the moment unfolding. She exchanged brief, almost imperceptible glances with her colleagues, each of them embodying the professionalism and integrity that had replaced the old order. As the cabin lights dimmed slightly to prepare for departure, Malcolm's phone buzzed softly. He glanced down to see a message from Isabella Crane. The system is responding. Controls are shifting. Justice is silent but powerful. He typed back a simple reply. This is just the beginning. The power of a single word. Now had set in motion a cascade of events that none aboard the plane would soon forget. It was a signal that transcended the immediate situation, a call to action embedded in a framework of strategic patience and deep resolve. Malcolm allowed himself a brief moment of reflection. This was not a victory claimed through confrontation or loud declarations. It was a triumph born of quiet calculation and unwavering dignity. His thoughts turned inward, recalling moments from his past when silence had been his greatest ally, the countless times he had faced microaggressions, subtle biases, and overt dismissals, the boardrooms where he had been the only person of color, navigating conversations weighted with unspoken prejudices. Yet, through it all, he had chosen to respond not with anger, but with strategic grace. He understood that power was not always about being the loudest voice in the room. Sometimes it was the steady hand that guided the course without drawing attention to itself. Suddenly, a voice broke the silence, soft but unmistakable. Malcolm spoke quietly, his words carrying the weight of a profound truth. "You should have sat down quietly," he said, his gaze locking onto the empty space where Harrison Beckett had once loomed. "Like I did." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. The words were a hammer blow, a stark contrast to Harrison's earlier outburst. They were not spoken in anger or triumph, but in the calm certainty of one who had endured and risen above. Passengers exchanged glances, the power of Malcolm's statement sinking in. It was a reminder of the dignity inherent in composure, the strength found in measured responses. The silence that followed was profound, almost sacred. It was the kind of quiet that speaks volumes, a testament to the victory of integrity over arrogance. Malcolm's eyes softened as he leaned back into his seat. The battle had been won not with force, but with quiet resolve. As the plane prepared for takeoff, the new crew moved through the cabin with grace, their presence a living symbol of change and accountability. Outside the windows, the runway lights stretched out, promising a journey not only across miles, but toward a future where respect and fairness might finally prevail. Malcolm closed his eyes for a moment, feeling the steady vibration of the engines beneath him. The flight was underway, but the journey was far from over. Within the cabin, whispers began to rise once more, this time filled with hope and a shared understanding. The quiet power of a man who refused to be diminished had spoken louder than any words. Malcolm Grant stared out the airplane window, watching the dark clouds stretch endlessly beneath the wings. The muted glow of the cabin lights reflected softly on his face, illuminating the quiet determination etched into his features. The steady drone of the engines was almost hypnotic, a reminder that despite the turbulence of human conflict, life moved forward. Inside, the cabin had settled into a calm rhythm, but Malcolm's mind was far from peaceful. He thought about the invisible battles fought every day, battles against prejudice, bias, and systemic injustice that often went unnoticed but left deep scars. He remembered the countless times in his career when he had been the only black man in the room, the subtle shifts in tone when his ideas were questioned more harshly than others, the polite nods that barely concealed dismissal, the microaggressions so small they almost felt imaginary but accumulated into a heavy burden. Malcolm had learned early that confrontation was a luxury few could afford. Instead, he had mastered the art of resilience, the quiet power of perseverance. He had built his empire on strategic patience and unyielding integrity. Yet, today's incident on Flight 327 was different. It was a public acknowledgement of a private reality, the tearing of his boarding pass, the forced displacement, the replacement of the flight crew. These were not isolated moments, but symptoms of a deeper problem. He glanced around the cabin, noting the passengers' expressions. Some avoided eye contact, uncomfortable with the raw display of privilege and its consequences. Others exchanged knowing looks, their faces reflecting a shared understanding of what had transpired. Malcolm's thoughts turned to Isabella Crane. She had been the unseen force behind the swift response, the architect of the protocol that had ensured justice was served. Their partnership, though complicated by differing philosophies, was a testament to what could be achieved when vision met action. He opened his phone and sent a brief message, "The work continues." Isabella's reply was immediate. Together. Malcolm's mind drifted to his own family, the lessons passed down through generations about dignity, strength, and perseverance. He thought of his mother's steady hands and unwavering faith, the values that had shaped him into the man he was. The flight attendants moved gracefully through the cabin, their renewed professionalism a sharp contrast to the earlier tension. Elena, the new lead attendant, caught Malcolm's eye and offered a respectful nod. It was a small gesture, but it spoke volumes about change, about accountability and respect. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, drawing strength from the moment. The journey was far from over, but the path ahead was clearer now. As the plane soared above the clouds, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. The battles he faced were invisible to many, but he was determined to continue fighting not with anger or resentment, but with the quiet power of dignity and strategic action. Around him, the cabin settled into a peaceful hush, the passengers lost in their own thoughts, unaware that they had just witnessed a turning point. Malcolm Grant was not just a man who had reclaimed his seat. He was a symbol of resilience, a quiet defender of justice in a world still learning to listen. The hum of the aircraft blended with the quiet murmurs of passengers settling into their long flight. Malcolm Grant sat back in seat 1A, his hands folded calmly on his lap. The plush leather felt familiar, a stark contrast to the turbulence that had preceded this moment. His eyes scanned the cabin once more, observing the subtle changes that had rippled through the space. Across the aisle, Isabella Crane adjusted the cuff of her silk blouse, her gaze steady and thoughtful. She reflected on the precision with which the protocol had been executed. The entire operation had been a symphony of unseen hands working in harmony to right an injustice. Malcolm's mind wandered to the many battles fought behind closed doors. These were the fights no one saw, negotiations, boardroom confrontations, strategic alliances. The real power was wielded in silence, in careful maneuvers that avoided spectacle but guaranteed change. He recalled the countless times he had encountered subtle resistance, invitations to meetings that never materialized, ideas dismissed without discussion, invisible barriers that stifled progress. These battles were exhausting, but he had learned that persistence and patience could eventually tip the scales. The incident on this flight was a rare public victory, but Malcolm knew it was just a moment in a much longer journey. The fight against systemic bias required more than singular acts of defiance. It demanded structural change. Isabella leaned forward slightly, her voice low but resolute as she spoke to Malcolm across the aisle. "This is only the beginning. We have the tools now to enforce accountability in ways they cannot ignore." Malcolm nodded in agreement. "We must remain vigilant. Change is never permanent until it is embedded in the system itself." The new flight crew moved through the cabin with grace, their professionalism a visible sign of the airline's commitment to reform. Elena, the lead attendant, ensured that every passenger was attended to with care, her demeanor calm and confident. Malcolm admired the transformation in the atmosphere. The once tense air was now filled with a quiet optimism, a sense that justice had found its way through the cracks. Yet, beneath the surface, he was acutely aware of the challenges ahead. The old guard would not relinquish power easily. There would be pushback, subtle and overt, from those invested in maintaining the status quo. He felt a familiar weight settle on his shoulders, the responsibility of not just fighting for himself, but for those who would come after him. Malcolm closed his eyes briefly, centering himself. The fight was far from over, but moments like this fueled his resolve. The plane began its ascent, climbing steadily into the night sky. The city lights below twinkled like distant stars, a reminder of the vast world beyond these cabin walls. As the flight continued, Malcolm allowed himself a rare moment of hope. The unseen hands that had set this chain of events in motion were a testament to the power of strategic patience and unwavering principle. In the quiet hum of the cabin, a new chapter was unfolding, one where dignity, respect, and justice would no longer be negotiable. Malcolm Grant reclined in Seat 1A, the plush leather molding comfortably around him as the airplane cruised steadily above the clouds. Outside, the sky was a vast expanse of darkness peppered with distant stars. Inside, the cabin was calm, but charged with the lingering tension of recent events. The flight attendants moved quietly but efficiently, their presence a reminder that order had been restored. Elena, the new lead flight attendant, glanced periodically at Malcolm with a subtle, respectful nod. Their eyes met briefly in unspoken acknowledgment of the journey they had both witnessed. Malcolm's mind, however, was not at ease. The calm was a fragile veneer masking the deeper storms yet to come. He thought of the battles that awaited him beyond the flight in boardrooms, in corporate meetings, in the halls of power where change was slow and resistance fierce. He recalled the countless nights spent reviewing strategies, drafting proposals, and building alliances designed to dismantle the subtle but pervasive structures of bias and exclusion. His fingers drummed lightly against the armrest as memories of past struggles surfaced, moments when he had been marginalized, overlooked, or dismissed. Each instance had left its mark, shaping his approach and steeling his resolve. Despite the progress made today, Malcolm knew that true victory would require persistence beyond isolated incidents. Systems built on entrenched privilege did not fall with a single blow. They required relentless pressure and unwavering commitment. Isabella Crane sat across the aisle, her gaze focused on the tablet in her hands. She was reviewing the preliminary reports from the airline's operational team regarding the crew replacement and the changes to the command structure. Her role was pivotal, the bridge between strategy and execution. She understood the weight of responsibility that came with wielding such influence. Her partnership with Malcolm, forged in the crucible of shared ideals and pragmatic compromise, was a testament to the complexity of leadership in times of change. A soft chime from Malcolm's phone interrupted his thoughts. A new message from Isabella read, "Boardroom battles ahead. Stay strong. We move as one." He smiled faintly and replied, "Together." The plane's gentle vibration was a steady heartbeat beneath him, a reminder that the journey was ongoing. The passengers around him remained absorbed in their own worlds, some asleep, others quietly reading or watching screens. Yet, beneath the surface, the currents of change were stirring, preparing to reshape the future. Malcolm allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. The events of the flight were a catalyst, a public acknowledgment of what many experienced in silence. He resolved to carry the lessons forward, to continue the work with the same quiet strength that had guided him thus far. The calm of the cabin was a temporary reprieve. Beyond these walls, the storm of transformation awaited, and Malcolm Grant was ready. The aircraft hummed steadily as it cut through the dark sky, its steady rhythm a quiet backdrop to the thoughts swirling in Malcolm Grant's mind. He settled deeper into Seat 1A, the place he had reclaimed not through confrontation, but with unyielding grace and strategic patience. The plush leather cushioned his body, yet it was the weight of what had been accomplished that truly grounded him. Around him, the cabin was calm. Passengers had resumed their journeys, but the events that had unfolded were far from forgotten. Whispers of the crew replacement, of Harrison Beckett's fall from grace, and Malcolm's silent strength would ripple far beyond these walls. Malcolm's gaze drifted to the window, where the horizon began to lighten with the first hints of dawn. It was a symbolic reminder every night eventually gives way to day, every challenge to opportunity. Beside him, Isabella Crane was reviewing her notes quietly. Her presence was steady, a constant through the tumultuous days and nights of corporate battles and quiet revolutions. She had been an indispensable partner, a strategist who balanced Malcolm's measured approach with a readiness to act decisively when the moment demanded. Their collaboration was a testament to the power of unity despite differences. While their philosophies sometimes diverged, Malcolm favoring quiet influence, Isabella embracing direct accountability, together they had engineered a shift in a system long resistant to change. Malcolm reached for his phone, composing a message to Isabella. "The journey continues. Let's ensure the path is clear for those who come after." She responded promptly, "Onward, with purpose." The flight attendants moved through the cabin, their professionalism a renewed promise of respect and dignity for all passengers. Elena's calm demeanor and attentive service had helped to restore balance to the atmosphere, reinforcing that change was not just an idea, but a practiced reality. Malcolm reflected on the deeper meaning of the day's events. This was not simply about one man's seat on a plane. It was about dismantling the invisible barriers that denied dignity to so many. It was about rewriting the rules of engagement to ensure fairness and accountability. He thought about the countless silent battles fought by others like him, battles invisible to the wider world, but crucial in shaping a just society. The system had spoken today, not with noise or spectacle, but with the quiet certainty of rightful change. And while one victory was never the end, it was a powerful beginning. As the sun rose over the horizon, casting golden light into the cabin, Malcolm allowed himself a moment of hope. The road ahead would be challenging, but with patience, strategy, and unwavering principle, transformation was possible. Outside, the world woke to a new day. Inside, Malcolm Grant prepared to continue his journey, one defined not just by success, but by the enduring power of quiet strength and justice. Malcolm Grant's story is a profound reminder that dignity can never be taken, it must be respected. Yet, the harsh reality is that discrimination still finds its way into even the most privileged spaces, often hidden in plain sight. This tale challenges us to confront those injustices, to refuse silence in the face of disrespect, and to champion accountability with quiet but unyielding power. As we close this chapter, remember that the fight against prejudice is ongoing, carried by those who choose strategic patience and courage over confrontation. We honor Malcolm's strength and the countless others whose battles remain unseen. Let this story inspire us to stand firm, to raise awareness, and to demand a world where every individual is treated with the respect they deserve. If this narrative moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to Silent Defenders. Your support fuels our mission to tell the stories that matter and bring light to the quiet struggles for justice. Stay tuned for more powerful stories that reveal the strength in silence and the change that comes when courage speaks. Thank you for watching.